The sky was turning the color of bruised peaches, a dusky orange fading into indigo as the forest around Nandita whispered its twilight secrets. Leaves rustled, not just from the wind, but from the movements of countless creatures preparing for the night. The jungle breathed with a slow, rhythmic intensity. It had been a long day, and Nandita, barefoot and dust-smeared, with her long black hair tied into a practical knot, stood with her eyes scanning the forest canopy. Her fingers brushed the handle of the machete she carried not for violence, but for necessity. She was 16, tall for her age, wiry with strength honed by years of living close to the wild. Her village lay a good 2 hours behind her, a cluster of thatched huts surrounded by fields of maize and banana trees. She shouldn't have been here this late, but something had pulled her deeper into the trees. It had started with a cry. Faint, high-pitched, unmistakable, a baby's cry. At first, she thought she was mistaken. A bird, maybe, or her imagination. But it came again, desperate, confused, lost. The kind of cry that slices through bone and makes every instinct turn alert. The kind of cry that isn't just heard, but felt. She dropped the bundle of herbs she'd been collecting and started moving. Fast, heart pounding. Legs flying over roots and rocks. The forest was thick with vines and underbrush, and even as the last light filtered through the canopy, she pressed forward, driven by a force larger than fear. Minutes later, she found a narrow path broken through a wall of ferns. It wasn't a trail, more like something had pushed through recently. Something large. Nandita crouched, touched the disturbed earth, her mind racing. The baby's cry sounded again, louder now, closer. She followed it with reckless urgency, scraping her arms on bark, ducking under low branches, eyes darting. And then, in a clearing surrounded by towering kapok trees, she saw it. At first, her mind refused to make sense of what she was seeing. There was a baby no more than a year old, lying on a patch of soft moss, wrapped in a colorful cloth. Alone, but it was not alone. 30 feet away, slithering across the leaves with a chilling grace, came the shape of death. An anaconda, huge and coiled like a moving shadow, almost invisible against the forest floor. Its scales caught the faint light like oil on water, dark green, black, and brown, a creature ancient and silent. Its tongue flickered in and out as it moved with terrifying calm toward the baby. Nandita's breath caught, her body froze. She had seen snakes before. Everyone in her village had. They were part of the landscape, respected and avoided, but this was unlike any snake she had ever encountered. It was monstrous, thick as a tree trunk and twice as long as a bullock cart. A predator so massive it seemed unreal, like something from the stories her grandmother used to whisper at night. But this was no story. This was flesh, muscle, hunger. The baby cried again. It stirred weakly, little fists batting at the air. It didn't know what loomed. Nandita's paralysis broke like glass. Her legs moved before her thoughts caught up. She sprinted into the clearing, shouting at the top of her lungs. A wild, primal noise designed not to scare the snake, because she knew snakes didn't fear noise, but to break the stillness, to announce her presence with fire. The anaconda stopped, its head rising slightly, tongue flicking again. She could feel its eyes, dark, lidless, fix on her. Get away. She screamed, as if words could change the nature of a creature that had no concept of mercy. The baby was no more than 10 feet from the snake now. Nandita didn't hesitate. She darted forward, slid on her knees, and snatched the bundle up into her arms. The baby felt warm and impossibly light, its cheeks streaked with tears, its cries turning into panicked hiccups as it sensed the chaos. Nandita spun on her heel, ready to flee, but the anaconda moved with astonishing speed, its body a sinuous blur as it closed the distance. She jumped back just in time to avoid the first strike. The snake's head slammed into the ground where she had been, sending up a spray of dirt and leaves. She stumbled, cradling the baby close to her chest, her breath coming in gasps. Her mind raced. Running was useless now. The snake was faster than it looked and stronger than anything she could fight with bare hands. But she had her machete. She backed slowly, keeping her eyes on the snake as it began to coil into a circle, preparing for another attack. Her free hand groped for the machete's hilt and drew it with a metallic whisper. She'd never used it against anything living, only trees, vines, and once, a wild boar that had charged her uncle. But this wasn't the time for hesitation. Stay back. She whispered to the baby as if it could understand, as if her voice could shield them both. The anaconda lunged again, this time not with its head, but with a looping motion meant to entangle her legs. She jumped sideways, barely dodging the whip of its body. She slashed with the machete, the blade skimming off scales with a sound like striking stone. It barely left a mark. The snake turned, recalibrating. Nandita spun, searching for high ground for cover for anything. That's when she saw the broken tree, an ancient fig half-toppled, its roots exposed, creating a natural hollow. It was 10 feet away. If she could get there, maybe she could wedge herself and the baby into a crevice, too narrow for the snake's massive coils. Maybe she didn't think, she ran. The snake came after her, a sliding wall of muscle and silent fury. She dove into the roots, curling her body around the baby, pushing them as far back as they could go. The anaconda reached the entrance and paused, its head weaving slowly as it assessed. It couldn't enter fully, but it didn't need to. It struck again, fangs bared, trying to wedge itself in. Nandita swung the machete in a frantic arc. This time, she connected with its mouth. A sharp hiss erupted. Blood, dark and almost black, sprayed across the roots. The snake recoiled, only to slam against the tree again, this time more forcefully. The wood creaked. The hollow shook. She screamed again, not in fear, but in rage. The baby sobbed in her arms, clutching her shirt, eyes wide. She looked down at the child, dirty, terrified, but alive, and something in her hardened. She wasn't just protecting a stranger. She was protecting a promise. A life. She gritted her teeth, shifted the baby to one side, and waited. The snake struck again. This time, she didn't just swing blindly. She timed it, watched the arc of its movement, and brought the blade down with every ounce of strength she had. It struck the side of the snake's jaw and sank deep. The creature reared back, thrashing now, its coils churning the forest floor. It couldn't reach them, but it wasn't leaving either. Minutes passed like hours as the snake writhed in pain and frustration. Nandita's arms ached, her body trembled. The baby was quieter now, hiccuping softly. Night had fallen fully. The forest around them shifted from warm to cold. The sounds changed: owls, crickets, distant howls. The anaconda lingered for a long while, then slowly began to retreat. Wounded, beaten, but not dead. When it was finally gone, Nandita didn't move, not yet. She waited. 10 minutes, 20, listening, feeling the forest settle. Only then did she crawl from the hollow, every limb screaming. She staggered to her feet and looked around. The clearing was torn. Blood smeared across leaves. The ground churned by scales and fear. But the path back was clear. She adjusted the baby in her arms. It was a girl, she realized now, with soft brown eyes and a tiny tuft of hair tied with a red thread. Someone had cared for her once. But how had she ended up alone in the jungle? That answer would have to wait. Nandita set off, retracing her steps. Her body was bruised, her spirit shaken. But her heart was burning. She didn't know the baby's name. She didn't know if the snake would come back. But she knew one thing: she had saved a life, and that meant everything. The path back to the village was cloaked in darkness, but Nandita walked with practiced instinct. Her bare feet pressed silently against the damp forest floor, dodging thorns, sidestepping roots. She cradled the baby girl tightly against her chest, one arm curled protectively around the small bundle while her other hand kept the machete ready, blade still sticky with blood. Her ears strained to hear beyond the rustling leaves and distant insect calls, every sound examined for slithering. The jungle didn't sleep, and tonight it felt more alive than usual. Fatigue pulled at her, but adrenaline pushed back harder. Her breath was shallow, her muscles aching, but her mind refused to slow. Where had the baby come from? No family in the village had reported a missing child, and no one would have dared wander this deep into the forest. A baby couldn't survive out here alone. Not for long. And yet, the girl had been there crying, exposed, directly in the path of the anaconda. It didn't feel like an accident. Nandita's jaw tightened. She paused to rest beneath an old tamarind tree, its sprawling branches silhouetted against the star-pocked sky. The baby had fallen asleep, breathing softly, tiny lips pursed and stained from dried tears. Nandita touched the girl's forehead gently. No fever, no sign of injury. Whoever she was, she'd made it through the worst of it, at least for now. But there was something strange about her. It wasn't just how she'd survived or how she'd ended up there. It was something deeper, a quiet pull Nandita couldn't explain, as if the girl radiated something invisible but potent. peaceful yet powerful. She couldn't describe it, only feel it. She didn't stop long. The village was still far, and she didn't want to risk another encounter. By the time she saw the outline of the first hut, the eastern horizon had begun to lighten. Birds sang the prelude to dawn, and the air cooled with the coming sun. As she stepped through the narrow gap in the surrounding palisade, her arrival did not go unnoticed. An old woman washing vegetables looked up sharply, water dripping from her hands. Two boys carrying fishing poles stopped mid-step. A dog barked once, then tilted its head, confused. Then came voices, curious, questioning. Nandita, wild-haired, streaked in mud and dried blood, holding a baby none of them recognized, was a vision out of some forgotten legend. "Where did you find her?" asked Ramu uncle, his eyebrows furrowed with concern. "In the jungle." Nandita said simply, her voice hoarse. "Near the old kapok grove, there was an anaconda, a big one." A hush fell over the villagers. Everyone knew the stories. Everyone feared the old parts of the jungle. The deeper reaches no one entered after sunset, where the trees grew too thick and even birds flew quiet. The tales spoke of spirits and monsters, some told in whispers around fires, others woven into the rhythms of prayer and ritual. They took the baby to the healer's hut, where Amma Parvati, the oldest woman in the village and the wisest, examined her. Nandita sat nearby, watching with sharp eyes, her fingers twitching to take the child back. She had grown attached to the little girl in the span of a few hours, in the way only someone who had fought for another's life could be. The child had stopped crying now. She didn't speak, of course, but there was something unusual about how calm she was, how alert her eyes looked as they scanned each face. "She's not from here," Parvati muttered, running her fingers over the baby's cheeks, then her palms. "Skin is too light, the hair's soft, not used to sun. No bruises, no rashes. Look at her nails, cut short, clean." "She was placed there," Nandita said, "deliberately, like someone left her to die." Someone whispered, "Left her to that thing?" "No," Parvati said, glancing at Nandita, "left her to be found." That thought haunted Nandita more than she could say. Over the next few days, the baby was kept in the healer's care. No one came looking for her. No messengers arrived from neighboring villages. No signs posted. No rumors of kidnappings or lost travelers. She remained nameless, and slowly the village began calling her Choti, the little one. But strange things began to happen. On the third night after her arrival, the village goats broke loose from their pen without explanation. When they were found at dawn, they were all gathered around the healer's hut, silent and unmoving, as if in vigil. Birds began to nest in the thatched eaves above Choti's room, warbling lullabies even at night. Wounded animals brought to Amma Parvati for help began healing faster than expected, and it didn't take long for people to notice. It happened only when Choti was nearby. Even Parvati, who had lived through famine, storms, and 3 earthquakes, found herself quietly unnerved. "Something watches over her," she whispered to Nandita one evening. "Something old," but not all were comforted. Some of the older villagers began to avoid the baby entirely. They muttered about spirits, about the jungle reclaiming what it had offered. Superstition runs fast in blood and fear even faster. Whispers spread too fast, too loud. What if the anaconda hadn't attacked by accident? What if it had been sent? What if the baby wasn't meant to be rescued? Nandita heard every word. She ignored them. She spent her days near Choti, feeding her rice milk, walking her under the banyan trees, singing softly into her tiny ears. She knew the baby was different, but she also knew she was good. Choti didn't cry at night. She laughed when others didn't. She reached out to hurt animals. Once Nandita saw her touch a snake, a harmless green vine snake, and it coiled gently around her wrist like an old friend. That was the night the dreams began. The first came like a whisper. Nandita found herself walking through the jungle, but everything was bathed in silver-blue light. The trees were taller than she remembered, and the sky was full of stars she didn't recognize. Then, from the shadows came a presence. Not human, not animal, something ancient. A face of shifting bark and eyes like fireflies. It didn't speak, but she felt its message: protect the child. Each night after, the dream returned. The jungle changed. Faces emerged in the dark, a tiger with golden eyes, a woman whose hair became vines, a river that spoke without words. All of them said the same thing: protect her. She is not what she seems. She is more. One evening, nearly a week after the rescue, Nandita sat at the edge of the village, holding Choti while watching the sun vanish behind the distant hills. Her machete lay beside her, cleaned and sharpened. She hadn't gone near the grove again, but it called to her, something unfinished. Something watching, then, a sound behind her. She turned. Ramu uncle stood there, but he wasn't alone. With him were 3 men Nandita didn't know. Strangers with sunburnt faces, rifles slung over their backs, and a badge of some private hunting syndicate pinned to their shirts. "We're here for the baby," one said coldly. Nandita rose slowly, shifting Choti against her shoulder. "She's not yours," she said. "She doesn't belong to you either." Parvati stepped from behind the trees. "You were in the grove, weren't you?" she said, voice trembling. "You left her there. You thought the snake would take her." "Why, she's not natural," the man said. "She's connected to something. A project. We were ordered to leave her, but you interfered, and now it's become a problem." Nandita's blood ran cold. "You tried to kill her. We tried to contain her," he snapped. "You don't understand what she is." "I don't need to understand," Nandita said, stepping back slowly, "to know that she's mine now." The man raised his hand. A shot fired. It missed on purpose, maybe, but it rang out like thunder, sending birds shrieking from trees. Then came another sound. A deep, unnatural hiss that shook the earth. The ground trembled from the forest behind the village. Something moved. The trees swayed as if a wind passed through them, but there was no wind. Leaves fell like rain, and then, with gliding certainty, it appeared, the Anaconda, but it was different. Slower, smarter. As if it knew exactly what it had come for, the men turned, rifles raised. But it wasn't looking at them, it was looking at Choti. And Choti was looking back, her tiny hand outstretched, not in fear but in recognition. The jungle held its breath, even the wind had stopped. The trees, birds, insects, and shadows, everything watched in a frozen hush as the Anaconda glided forward from the undergrowth, its immense form making no sound, though the ground beneath it seemed to groan with the weight of its passing. The hunters, caught between fear and disbelief, took a collective step back. Their weapons shook in their hands. The snake's eyes were not wild or ravenous, they were ancient, calm, focused on the child. Choti, resting against Nandita's shoulder, was not afraid, her small body relaxed. Her fingers reached toward the snake's massive head as though greeting an old friend, a missing part of herself. Her lips moved soundlessly. The snake stopped a few feet away from Nandita, its head rising slowly, high enough to be level with her chest. It didn't strike, it didn't coil. It simply watched. Nandita stood still, clutching Choti tightly, her own body frozen between instinct and awe. Every hair on her skin stood upright, but not out of fear. This was something greater. She felt the same pull now that had first led her into the forest days ago. A current moving through the roots, the leaves, the stars above. And it all seemed to center around the child in her arms. One of the hunters panicked. He screamed, raised his rifle, and fired. The shot rang out like a whip crack. It struck the Anaconda on the side of the neck. Blood sprayed, dark and slow, but the snake didn't move. Instead, Choti cried out, not in pain, but in a sound unlike any human child should make. A resonant, vibrating tone that echoed far beyond her size. The trees shook, the earth groaned. The lights in the huts behind them flickered like candles in a wind. And in that moment, the jungle answered. From every direction, animals emerged, dozens, hundreds, silent, unified, boars, deer, langurs, peacocks, birds of prey. Even a tiger stepped into the clearing, its yellow eyes locked on the men with rifles. The hunters turned in a terrified circle, surrounded by life itself. They raised their guns again, but this time their hands were trembling too much to aim. One dropped his weapon and bolted into the woods. The others followed, crashing through the undergrowth, never once looking back. The animals did not give chase. They didn't need to. Their message was already written into the moment. When the last of the strangers had vanished, silence returned. The tiger turned to Choti, gave a single low growl, and disappeared into the trees. One by one, the rest of the animals followed. The snake remained. It moved closer. Nandita felt her body tense again, unsure whether to run or stand her ground. The Anaconda leaned forward, slowly extending its head until it touched Choti's hand. The baby giggled softly and pressed her palm against its scales. A warm glow pulsed beneath her fingers, a gentle golden light that spread across the snake's wound. It healed as they watched, the flesh knitting itself together until no trace of the bullet remained. Nandita stared, breathless. The entire village had gathered now, watching from a safe distance. No one spoke, not even Parvati. Then, without a sound, the anaconda turned and began to leave, its body vanishing into the darkness like mist. But this time, Nandita didn't feel dread. She felt sadness, as though something beautiful had been shown to her, only to be taken away again. She looked down at Choti, who was already resting her head against her shoulder, calm once more. The days that followed were marked by change. The jungle near the grove grew greener, richer. Fruit trees bore more than they ever had. The river that passed near the village ran clearer, purer. Crops flourished, children stopped falling ill. People whispered about Choti, calling her the jungle's daughter, some with reverence, some with uncertainty. But the whispers of fear had quieted, replaced by a deeper, awed respect. No one questioned Nandita's right to raise her. Not after what they'd seen. Life resumed, but Nandita knew nothing would ever be quite the same. She built a small hut of her own near the banyan tree where she and Choti liked to sit. She trained herself harder each day, learning not just how to survive, but how to protect. The jungle was no longer a mystery to her. It was a language she was learning to speak, and Choti was her teacher. By the time the girl turned 2, she could walk barefoot across the forest paths without fear. Animals followed her. Trees seemed to lean toward her. At night, she still had dreams. They grew clearer now. The jungle spirits spoke more openly, no longer just in symbols, but in voice. They told her that Choti had been born in a place where nature had been torn apart by human greed. She had been created, or perhaps summoned, by a force beyond science, something ancient that had grown tired of being ignored. Choti was not a weapon. She was a balance. Left in the forest not to die, but to live, to find someone who would protect her, not exploit her. That someone had been Nandita. One day, Parvati called Nandita to her side. The healer was old now, her skin wrinkled like dried bark, but her eyes were still sharp. "She will not stay with us forever," she said softly, stroking Choti's cheek as the child played with pebbles. "She will outgrow us, not just in years, but in soul. But you were always meant to be her guide, her protector, until the world learns to walk with the forest instead of trampling it." Nandita didn't argue. She knew it already. She had felt it in her bones since the first night in that hollow tree. Her life had changed the moment she heard that cry. And no matter what came next, she would be ready. Years passed, Choti grew. Her powers grew, so did her understanding of them. She never used them to harm, only to heal, to nurture, to calm. Nandita taught her how to use her strength with care, how to listen more than speak, how to act only when the world truly called for it. Strangers came sometimes. Scientists, officials, story seekers. But they never found what they were looking for. The forest always turned them around. Birds misled their maps. Paths shifted beneath their feet. Time slowed until they returned the way they came, confused and empty-handed. Only one truth remained: in the heart of the jungle lived a girl once rescued by another. A girl who had been nearly swallowed by death, only to be cradled by life itself. And beside her always was the girl who had saved her. Nandita never asked for thanks. She never sought reward. She had fought a beast with nothing but instinct and will, not because she knew the child's power, but because something inside her had said, "This one must live." And that had been enough. One morning, when Choti was nearly grown, she and Nandita stood at the edge of the same grove where the anaconda had once slithered in hunger. The light danced through the canopy in gold streaks. The wind carried the smell of blooming orchids and sweet sap. The girl turned to her guardian. "It's time," she said quietly. Nandita nodded, not because she wanted to say goodbye, but because she had always known this day would come. Choti belonged to the forest. She had simply come through Nandita to return to it. The girl embraced her tightly with no words and walked into the trees barefoot, unafraid. The jungle closed behind her like a curtain of green, but Nandita did not cry. She stood for a long time, watching the path where the girl had vanished, the light painting her skin in streaks of sun and shadow. She had done her part. The baby she had once rescued from the jaws of death had grown into something far more powerful than anyone could imagine. Not a creature of legend, but a guardian of life, and Nandita, now a legend herself in whispered stories across nearby lands, would forever be known not just as the girl who faced the anaconda, but the one who chose to protect, not fear, and through that choice had changed the world.